Indigenous people around the world have been facing a variety of challenges since the dawn of civilization. Indigenous people are some of the most marginalized and disadvantaged populations in the world, often living in poverty and struggling to access basic human rights. The most commonly cited challenge facing indigenous people is the lack of land rights and sovereignty. In many countries, native populations have had their ancestral lands taken away by colonizing powers or by governments or corporations. This has resulted in displacement, poverty, and a lack of access to resources that are otherwise available to non-indigenous people. In addition, indigenous people often face discrimination from the majority population, resulting in unequal access to education, healthcare, and other services. Environmental degradation is another major challenge that indigenous people face. As global warming continues to worsen, the environment is becoming increasingly hostile and unpredictable. This is particularly true for indigenous communities who rely on natural resources for their livelihoods. They face an uphill battle as they try to protect the traditional lands and ways of life from the effects of climate change. Indigenous people also struggle with the lack of political and economic representation. In many countries, indigenous people are not represented in the government or in decision-making bodies, leaving them without a voice in the political process. This lack of representation also makes it difficult for indigenous people to access resources or to fight for their rights. Finally, indigenous people are often subject to human rights abuses. The United Nations has documented a wide range of human rights violations against indigenous populations around the world, including forced relocation, lack of access to health care, and discrimination in the workplace. These violations are exacerbated by the lack of access to justice and legal remedies available to indigenous people. Indigenous people have been facing these challenges for centuries, and it is clear that much more needs to be done to ensure their rights and access to resources are respected. Governments, corporations, and other actors have a responsibility to ensure that indigenous people are granted the same rights and access to resources as other citizens. In addition, more needs to be done to ensure that indigenous people are represented in decision-making bodies and given the chance to protect their traditional ways of life. Only then can we ensure that the rights of indigenous people are respected and protected.